Hey, welcome into the House of L podcast. I'm Lawrence. Thanks so much for hanging out. The beard is growing back in, and then you find out exactly how old you are when you do it. But I have reached the stage where it stopped hurting my face, so I'm going to let it go for a little while longer. And then I got some TV to do on Sunday, so I'm going to decide probably Friday whether or not we're going to go Santa Lawrence or if we'll go with a little bit more of a youthful look. Hey, Remy Martin, our sponsor, we appreciate them. They are continuing their relationship with this podcast. So think about celebrating with some Remy Martin. I got some ideas for Remy in the new year, and we're going to try to make them happen. So shout out to them for continuing to support this. Please support the people that support this podcast. So Remy Martin, if you're like just you're in Benny's and you're like, hey man, I would like some Remy Martin. Go get that. All right. Okay. So the news broke yesterday, and I was sitting here like, man, the last time that I had a day off, I jumped on the pod and jumped on the air. And that was Black Friday when they fired Matt Eberflus. And I was like, I think I'm just going to chill. Because I knew that you would be here today, and I appreciate you for being here. But I'm starting to really appreciate those times off. And there's plenty of time for me to talk about this new hire. It didn't necessarily have to be in the moment. And, Shane even called me. He's like, do you want to come on? I'm like, I just can't. I just don't have it in me today. But I do today. And let's get after it. Here's the thing about the Ben Johnson. A couple things I want to get to. And there's going to be a lot more that we end up doing on the air with Speaks and I later on today. But I wanted to talk about this aspect of it because this is the part that I think is really interesting. Two things. One, Ryan Poles got his man. I am impressed that he was able to convince the powers that be that they needed to make it right, that they needed to, whatever it was that Ben Johnson wanted, as far as money and opportunity and all of that stuff, they said, all right, we are going to do it. And honestly, that was my biggest question. My biggest thing was, if it comes down to a bidding war, if it comes down to not letting someone out of your building because the offer is so good, are the Bears going to be able to do that? And they pulled that part off, and they should get credit for that. I don't know if the Ben Johnson hire is a slam dunk. It seems to fit all of the things that you want, but as you've heard me say on this podcast time and time again, being a play caller, being an offensive coordinator, different job description than head coach. If what I'm hearing about who his staff might be is correct, then I'm already encouraged by some of the people that Ben Johnson is going to hire, like Dennis Allen, to be his defensive coordinator. But it's still being the one who makes the final decision, being the one who plans the schedule is a very different task than being the person who puts together the offense to game plan against an opponent. So I wish him a lot of luck in that regard. And I think that it's really impressive that the Bears were like, no, you're not getting away from us. Your season's over. You had a day to mourn it. Come on through. We're going to give you this bread. We're going to give you this power, and you're not leaving. You're not going to Vegas. You're not going to sit in front of Tom Brady. He's not going to throw his rings on the tell you can do whatever you want. You're going to come here. We are going to make a competitive offer, and you're going to take it. He's like, steak dinner. Boom. That's good news for the Bears. That whether it's the relationship, like I guess Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles like crossed over as grad assistants at Boston College, and who knows if that matters or not. There are plenty of people that know me from HF or DePaul, and I'm not sure that would then get them to give me millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. In fact, I know it's not true because no one's giving me a damn thing. I went to high school with a bunch of rich kids. You think any of them gave me money or opportunity? The only person who did was one of my best friends, and that's Ben Bradley. He didn't give me money. We just cool like that. Anyway, I always think that trying to make those connections is a little bit difficult. Like there are people that I worked with in the past that I would run through a wall for, but it's rare that it's a very small like encounter or like you weren't in the trenches together and people grow apart and they grow away. So we'll see. Like maybe when Ben has his press conference, he'll talk about them and their relationship and their connection. And maybe it's deeper than what it looks like on paper. The second thing that I think is really interesting is that Ben didn't want to run it back in Detroit. I was watching that game. You saw that game Saturday night. The offense, there was some questionable stuff. There was some questionable stuff that went on in that game. Having one of the most untrustworthy receivers be forced into making a decision was a choice, and it was a bad one. The offense isn't what lost them the game. Their defense was just, at some point, you got guys out there being like, what are we in? I just got here. I'll just stick him. Is that cool? And Washington just went up and down and up and down and up and down. I was joking on Twitter how the NFC title game is going to be like the ghost of Christmas past for the Bears. You're going to have Jaden Daniels in that game. You're going to have Cliff Kingsbury in that game. Dan Quinn in that game, Saquon Barkley. If you believe that the Bears were really interested in bringing in Saquon, they're all going to be there. Jalen Carter is going to be the ghost of Christmas past. But the Bears get to hold their heads up pretty high. Ben Johnson not wanting to run it back is shocking to me because of how embarrassed they got. Now, maybe he looked at it and he's like, you know what? I'm tired of this shit. I want to run my own program. And that was one of the concerns that I had on whether or not he actually wanted to be a head coach. There's no shame in that. I think people look at it as like, if you're not at the epitome of the industry that you're in, then are you really a success? I deal with this in my industry. Well, don't you want to go work for ESPN? Yeah, I mean, I guess if it was the right opportunity, but that would also mean probably leaving Chicago and moving to Connecticut. Don't you want to go do radio in New York? Actually, no, I don't. It's funny. Dimitri Ravanos, who works for Barrett's Media, wrote a really good piece about how it seems like less and less like people are market jumping. And I was thinking about it while I was reading it. And one, I think sports radio is provincial, and it's a point that he made in the piece. Two, I just think that at a certain point, there's so much to like the stuff that you have to learn. Like I've been dealing with this and talking about this with Layla as someone who I think now is a full-fledged Chicagoan. She's been here 10 years. But the amount of history that she has to learn on Chicago sports, stuff that she didn't live. And anyone who comes in from out of town, like there's this, like, give me an encyclopedia and I'll just remember everything. And that's not what I always say when new people come into town. Start with the season that you're in. And then inside of that season, there's going to be callbacks of stuff that happened before. You can't be in a new market and be responsible for the entire history of the Cubs, the entire history of the White Sox, the entire history of the Blackhawks, the entire history of the Bears, that's too much. You just start building your own like history book with your experience. That's how I view it. Some people may see it differently, but I thought it was a really good piece by Dimitri. It's very interesting, very thought provoking about like market and market jumping. Anyway, I thought that we would see, because of how badly things went, I thought it was more likely that Ben Johnson would say, man, we really left something out there and we need to go back and claim it. For the Bears' sake, I'm glad that he didn't. But I would have understood, like after that embarrassment, I would have totally understood him being like, nope, unfinished business. But what it shows to us is that the concept of unfinished business is maybe not as important as like the reality of what your goals are. Would you have liked to have won the Super Bowl in Detroit? Absolutely. With Jared Goff and the offense that you put in? Absolutely. But you can get caught up chasing that thing. And now he gets to completely start over and build his thing. And I'm excited to see what he puts together. I'm really excited to see what he puts together. Because this is, don't kill me for this, okay? No one can argue with this hire. And I will remind you, no one could argue with the pick of Caleb Williams. And you see how on Saturday you were having all sorts of buyer's remorse and you were having regret, and people were in my mentions all day Saturday and Sunday about Jaden Daniels. And Sean King was like, hey, I kept trying to tell y'all about Jaden Daniels. No one can argue that this was the right move. That doesn't mean it was the right hire. We'll see. Out of the candidates that were out there, this was clearly the number one target. It doesn't mean it'll work. Now Ryan Poles has got a lot of work to do and reshaping the way that the Bears look overall. And I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic about it. I think it's a really good match for Caleb. And that's, I guess, if you're Ryan Poles, you're saying, look, let me push all these chips in. I bet on this guy. I bet on this quarterback. Let me keep betting on him. And if I fail, I did it with the best intentions of trying to make this team better by making the quarterback position better. I'll have more on the air. We'll have more throughout the week as we learn more. I'm actually kind of excited to learn more about Ben Johnson now that he is actually the Bears head coach instead of it being a theory. I'm curious to learn more about him from people who know him, and I'm excited about what happens next. I appreciate you too. Thanks to Remy Martin for their support of this podcast. There's more stuff coming as 2025 continues. I got a lot of cool ideas that I spent the weekend knowing that I had time off, jotting down some ideas for House of L, and I'm kind of jacked that the day off gave my mind an opportunity to expand. And that's usually what happens, where the moment that I know I have relaxed on a vacation or just a day off is when my mind goes to creative places. And I think I've gone to a creative place. We'll see how it all turns out. Talk to you next time. All right. Peace.